of Indicom, also represented by John Clark, who is the Jamaicans for Justice Board Chair, and the individual was also represented by Miss Celine Diedrich. JFJ's legal manager, Sashika Richards, would have also lent some assistance to the litigation process. So why is this a landmark ruling? Why is it significant for us as a society to really keep up with what is happening? Now, for those who have been following Mr. Morgan's case over the years, it made the public space, it made the media, wherein he was involved in defrauding Marcia Griffiths, the legendary Marcia, of funds, allegedly. He was convicted and asked to serve 12 years. Now, following that conviction, he sought to appeal the matter, wherein he asked for some transcript from the court. The court had mistakenly I think they didn't know what happened to his appeal at the time. They lost it. They filed it in the wrong court. And he actually served, I think, over 10 years of his 12-year sentence before the matter was even brought before the Court of Appeal. When it was brought before the Court of Appeal indicated, unfortunately, that given the time that was served, they don't believe that the appeal process should go forward. The essence of the Privy Council ruling was that it said that it was a clear miscarriage of justice for the Court of Appeal not to have heard the matter, notwithstanding a significant part of his sentence being served, because again, this is in keeping with public interest. How can you misplace an application for an appeal, which is a fundamental constitutional right? It is also a right that is recognized in international law. And outside of that, why would you deny this person their right to have their matter heard in the court? So the Privy Council ruled that it was a miscarriage of justice, and our board chair, John Clark, has been speaking to the media on the matter, asking for justice reform to be done, and he has called on the Minister of Justice, the Honourable Delroy Chuck, to ensure that what Mr. Morgan was subject to does not recur. At some point, we have to ensure that when appellants bring their matters forward, documents are served timely. We can't keep having these things happening. No matter what you may think of Mr. Morgan's action, we have a right to a fair trial. And with that being said, we do have a right to an appeal as well. And the court system cannot be the basis upon which our fundamental and constitutional rights are being denied to us. So again, a landmark case, and we hope that the government will take heed of what is in that judgment. Jade is back with us. Jade, you can just say hi to the listeners.
Yes, hello everyone. My apologies, but I had to make sure our stream was up and running so
and
that
it's
you
now
can participate. Yes, it is.
So persons can join us. Perfect.
Absolutely.
Now, another matter that touched us last week that is of concern for human rights, and Jade and listeners, we're going to be having that discussion in the second half of the program. It's around Kurt Mitchell, who was awarded over $4 million for deprivation of liberty that he suffered under the state of emergency, having been detained for 21 days, I believe.
Yes.
No charges proffered. So we're going to be having that discussion.
And I just wanted to mention, as we're talking about administrative issues, as you mentioned, the appeal case from the Privy Council, that we even had the Chief Justice speaking in several of the Lotto scamming cases, having to dismiss them because of the amount of administrative backlog with certain reports that are necessary to establish the offences. So those cases had to be dismissed, and all of that work.
All the victims that suffered as a result. And remember that Lotto scamming is not just fraud issues. A lot of the Lotto scamming matters have been tied to murder and gang-related offences. So
absolutely.
Quite important. Last week, I think, when it comes to child rights, which is the subject of our discussion today, last week shook us, Jade. There were 3 children, 11, 12, and 13 years old, who were being sexually groomed by grown men. And they were found by the Port Henderson Road in Portmore. That is commonly referred to as Back Road.
Yes.
Thankfully, citizens who are well-thinking realize that these children are children and alerted the police. The police intercepted, and the men, I believe, were arrested. But what shook me were the comments that were placed online.
Absolutely.
The pitney them bad.
Yes.
Where them a go with big man for. Them a get what them want. Now, adults, a child cannot consent to sex with an adult. They can't. The law prohibits it. And at some point, the greater responsibility has to be on the adults.
Absolutely.
These comments were unfortunate, and we ought to refrain and think a little bit more critical as adults and well-thinking Jamaican citizens. How can you be blaming an 11-year-old child?
Absolutely.
We have to do better as a country. And again, kudos to the adults around by Portmore who alerted the police, because we have to be vigilant in protecting our nation's children. We have to move away from blaming children for their actions, and let's look at how we can empower the parents. And where the parents fall short of their duties, report them to 211. But we have to stop this nonsense. These comments were disturbing on social media.
Yes.
And I want to say Jamaica Youth Advocates Network, JAN, they released a statement asking for greater levels of sensitivity. And JAN JFJ joins you in that call. Another matter I want to touch on quickly, Jade, in the interest of time. Nikita Noel. For those who may remember, young Nikita, aged 9 years old, she was raped and murdered in March of this year. We're seeing on social media that the person of interest, her stepfather, he pled guilty to the crime, and so we hope that he serves the years, because this was a brutal attack on a little girl. You defamed her body and then you murdered her, and our thoughts are with the family as they continue to mourn, because this is not something that a mother gets over at all. A community gets over. So I think much more needs to be done to protect our children, and it's a conversation we're going to be having again when it comes to what are we doing with the Child Care and Protection Act and the proposed bill. All right, over to you, Jay.
Absolutely. Well, in the interest of time, I won't add another devastating headline to our list of devastating headlines that we've just discussed. I will go straight into our right of the day today, which focuses on the right of the child for legal representation. So this right is represented at Article 37D of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, and it states that where a child has been deprived of their liberty, they have the right to promptly access legal or other appropriate assistance, and the right to challenge the legality of the deprivation of their liberty before a court or other competent, independent, impartial authority, and they are entitled to a prompt decision in such an inquiry.
We're going to take the break, and then when we return, we discuss the topic with opening up on the issue and then certainly going straight to our guests. So we take the break and return.
It's summer, it's hot with our 9 for 9 anniversary deal here on the Bridge 99 FM. Buy commercials in multiples of 9 and pay the same price. Multiply 9 by any number and pay that amount to promote your business. All you need to do is give us a call at 876-669-5000 and ask about your 9 for 9 anniversary deal here at the Bridge 99 FM. Conditions apply.
Over 14,000 Jamaicans are living with HIV and not yet on treatment. We want you to know you can live a normal life with HIV. Now is the time to get on treatment. Now is the time to start taking your medication on time, every time. Now is the time for your HIV status to become undetectable. Come to Jamaica AIDS Support for Life. We will help you to reach viral suppression. Now is the time to achieve all your goals and live a long and healthy life. To get on treatment, contact Jamaica AIDS Support for Life at 876-925-0021. A message from Jamaica AIDS Support for Life and the kind support of USAID from the American people.
Last year, Reggae Sumfest was on fire as a host of top-flight Jamaican artists turned out for an unforgettable musical tribute to iconic dancehall producer and prolific hitmaker Dave Kelly. This year, it will be magnificent as leading Jamaican entertainers across generations will come together to honor one of the most influential figures in modern popular music, producer and sound system operator extraordinaire, Lloyd James, the man we have come to know as King Jammy. Yes, it's tribute to the king. Reggae Sumfest 2023, Catherine Hall, Montego Bay, Jamaica, July 16 to 22. You can't miss this. Sponsored by H&L Rapid True Value Flow, Iberostar, JTV Secrets, Red Stripe, Grace, Magnum, TVJ, and H&L Agro.
King James, play sweeter, stronger, better.
You're now in tune to
The Bridge 99 FM
from Jamaica
To the world. Right.
The people's champion. Our mission is love. Our vision is love. Jamaicans by justice. The people's champion. Justice for all.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. Today we are going to be having our substantive discussion around the proposed replacement for Section 24 in the Child Care and Protection Act. And I cheekily headed up today as new name, same effect, because we would have identified along with some of our guests that will be joining us that while the provisions aim to seemingly provide an alternative to what was there before, the effect of these provisions might have a similar level of institutionalization and may not have the positive effect that we are hoping to see. So on June 28th, Minister of Education Favour Williams would have announced this amendment to the Child Care and Protection Act to repeal Section 24 and to replace that section through using the term behavioural challenges throughout the Act in several new provisions under Section 14 and others. Yes, so...
in respect of such a child to include a residential therapeutic order or a non-residential therapeutic order having regard to the results of a social inquiry report and a psychological or psychiatric report in respect of the child ordered by the court, and provide that a children's court before which any child is brought under Part 1 of the Act, other than a child alleged to have committed an offence, may order that the child be placed under the care of a children's officer for a specified period not exceeding 3 years, instead of a probation and aftercare officer as currently obtains under the Act.
That was the Minister of Education, the Honourable Favour Williams. Now, JFJ and other civil society organisations, some of whom are on the call here, we collectively wrote an open letter to the Minister, to the parliamentarians, actually, all 84 at the lower and the upper house, voicing our concerns. I know that UNICEF would have also voiced some concerns directly to the Minister of Education, hoping that we repeal Section 24 in its entirety and be cautious about what we are inserting for those new provisions. And you heard Jade indicating that the wide gambit of behaviours covered under the Act with the terminology behavioural challenges are of concern. So we are joined by Alexis Goff, human rights advocate, Carla Gulato, executive director of Stand Up for Jamaica, and Sharika Mills of JAN. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Miguel.
I'll start out with Alexis. Alexis, if you could just give us quickly and a little bit of a historical overview of the challenges that we have with these the Section 24 and what civil society organizations have done. And you have been a foundation member of JFJ, so if you could just put in context for the listeners, what have we been advocating for over the years and why we have some of the concerns that we have?
Yeah, absolutely. So in before 2004, when the Child Care and Protection Act was passed, there was the Juveniles Act in 1951, which allowed for children to be deemed beyond parental control, what we call uncontrollable, and placed in children's home or place of safety. And what was happening up to 2004 was that children's homes and places of safety were being severely overcrowded, and many of the owners or the people who ran the children's homes said that it was because of this category of children being uncontrollable that they couldn't manage. And so there was then the Keating report, which took place in the early 2000s, which preempted the Child Care and Protection Act, which had a recommendation of treating children deemed uncontrollable separately from children in need of care and protection and children who were in conflict with the law. And so what took place with the passing of the Child Care and Protection Act was that they added an option, the legislators added an option where children could be incarcerated, sent to prison for being uncontrollable. And what that did was instantly, that criminalization or act of criminalizing uncontrollable meant that increasingly number of children were sent to prison for being uncontrollable. In 2013, Jamaicans for Justice launched a campaign, the Lift Up Not Lock Up campaign, which called for uncontrollable to be removed entirely from the act. There were other calls for uncontrollable to be placed, to be put back as in need of care and protection. But fundamentally, the major call was that uncontrollable should be gone. And the major reason for that was that the uncontrollable does not take into consideration it attempts to hide instead of support children and their families who are going through challenging situations, normal, logical, challenging situations, as happens in child development and adolescent development. And JFJ's call was never for institutionalizing or for the creation of more institutions. Instead, it was for investing in resources at the community level to make things such as mental health services super accessible for parents and for children, to beef up support services in education institutions as well, and also to look at the root causes for children and families who are struggling, such as having substandard wages, instability in housing, and also having parents who have children with disabilities, which is a major reason why children are sent to children's homes, not because parents do not want their child or to take care of their child, but it is increasingly hard for parents to take care of children with disabilities, to support parents and families instead of having that as an option. And so this amendment does not, that's the background, and this amendment does not meet what were the original calls back in 10 years ago.
Yes. You know, Alexis, I hear you talking a lot about, trying to reduce institutionalization. And I have to ask, a lot of people look at this and say, my real question is this something that we need to legislate? Right? So the issue that we're trying to solve, trying to address children with behavioral issues, with mental health issues, is this something that needs to be in legislation, in your estimation?
Let's direct that one to Shariko.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Shariko, please.
Thank you for that. I'd say no, it's not something that needs to be in legislation. I think especially when we look at the things that have been described as behavioral challenges, some of the things are, truancy from schools. It's not listening to your parents or habitually not listening to your parents. And so in instances like that, maybe the court is just not the appropriate forum to have this dealt with, and then to send children to possibly, correctional facilities to further resolve this. It's just not the correct forum. And so definitely I agree with that, and to say that there needs to be more community support. We need to look at other avenues where these can be addressed where children are not locked up. I think even just imagining being in a court like that must be a frightening circumstance for a child. And so even that could further traumatize the child and make it difficult to deal with whatever issue you're trying to deal with. So I think we just need to look for other, social avenues, other ways we can support entire families. Because one other thing I note is that parents have been completely left out of this new amendment. Like there is no... there's nothing in it that says how parents would support this whole thing, except for the fact that parents should inform the court promptly if their child is not showing up to one of these facilities. And so that's even concerning too, like what support is there for the family as a whole and not just criminalizing the child.
And the burden, because just to plug here, and Alexis can correct me, but this is also one of the calls that JFJ made a decade ago for the parents to get the support as well. Carla, to the best of my knowledge, you were by one of the facilities today?
Yes, I did. Unluckily.
Can you just walk the listeners through the numbers of for children who may still be in the juvenile detention facilities on the basis of being uncontrollable, and what are some of the issues that they currently face?
That is something that I really wanted to share with you today, because we have been lobbying since a long time against the uncontrollable, and I think Alexis and you have been explaining that uncontrollable, all of us, we know that is a behavioral problem generated by a trauma. Therefore, I don't know, and we do not know why it should be considered as a crime. Therefore, there should be no detention, there should be prevention, there should be assistance, and there should be care for those which have been somehow abused, and therefore they behave in an unruly way. Since 1 year and a half, according to what we all know, the Article 24 concerning the uncontrollable has been partially amended, right? And therefore, the promise was not to send children to correctional juveniles institution unless they were committing a crime. The idea was to introduce slowly but safely the concept of diversion. That's why I want to share today these numbers, because in last year when I went to South Cap female juveniles, there were 34 girls. And I was surprised because usually there were more. And I was informed that due to the fact that the instructions were not to send them through the courthouse to juvenile institutions, number have been drastically reduced.
Okay.
When I went today, I need to share it with you because I'm still thinking a lot about what I have been witnessing today. There were 72 girls. It was a sort of special award day, school and award, etc., organized by Stand Up, and they were our trainers, etc. So when I went there, I was watching how many children there were, and I was very disappointed. And I was learning from the superintendent and the rehabilitation manager that they also are disappointed because basically the instruction from the previous amendment of Article 24 has been completely ignored, and therefore children are still sent to juvenile institution quite in numbers, because from December to now, basically numbers have been doubled. And the other thing which I was...
Carla, hold that thought for us. We have to take the break now. Bridge need to pay the bills with their advertisers. Hold for us.
Do that.
The new crispy barbecue zinger from KFC. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger licking good. The time by KFC is
1:31.
Caribbean Airlines presents Reggae Sumfest Street Dance on Monday, July 17 at the Old Hospital Park, Montego Bay. We are killing them with style and pattern in a dancehall fashion from 7 p.m. to 2 a.m. with a performance by Iwata.
Yeah.
Enjoy music by DJ Banker and Poppy from Della Soul Sound, Johnny Cool, Dexter Pepper, and Crazy Chris. Admission ain't free. Sponsored by H&L Rapid True Value, H&L Agro, Low, Iberostar, Secrets, JTB, UDC, and many more.
Hi, I'm Barry Williams, a classically trained baritone, inviting you to an evening with the classics, featuring myself along with renowned soprano Laurie Burnett and other students of classical music. Join me at the UWI Chapel Mona on Sunday, July 30th at 6 p.m. for a classical masterpiece you won't forget. Admission $3,000. Tickets available at the Music Mart and Fontana Pharmacies, Barbican and Waterloo. Barry Williams in classical concert. See you there.
KFC, take it up a notch with the new Zinger. It's got the taste and the flavor, irresistible. Zinger so deliciously, it's on a new level. Crispy barbecue Zinger. Love the onion, crisp with the cheddar.
The new crispy barbecue Zinger. Delicious Kentucky fried chicken, bacon, cheddar cheese, crispy onions with smoky barbecue sauce, and a brioche bun. Available for a limited time. The new crispy barbecue Zinger. Get ready for a whole new level of flavor. KFC, it's finger licking good.
We say welcome home, Caribbean Airlines.
Back on the go again, back on the road again. It's time to fly and get away. Where we have no problems, it's just we friends and good vibes there. We restore, reset all the energy, ready to reconnect with the family. Our renewed commitment to we people there, to we people there.
We say welcome home. We got Caribbean, we got Caribbean, we got Caribbean, we got Caribbean. Got it in the region, we got Caribbean, we got Caribbean.
Hello?
You are a winner! In Digicel's 4 cars in 4 weeks promotion. You could speed up with a brand new Hyundai Tucson SUV or win $40,000 cash in our daily cash call from 876-619-5000.
Go home and win!
Receive a top-up of $20 or more from abroad. That's just one of the 6 ways you can enter to win. Tell your friends and family foreign to visit topupdigicelgroup.com today and send your credit fast. Follow at Digicel Jamaica for more information. Digicel, better connected. Authorized under Section 53 of the Betting Gaming and Lotteries Act.
Watch out, man, you don't know this advice at the end present for the Bridge 99 FM connecting. We said that station, yeah, a leader. I will say, give him like a time, a like a feature. Under the moonlight and sense of me, yeah. The Bridge 99 FM, Deanna representing.
The people's champion.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are discussing the repeal and replacement of Section 24 of the Child Care and Protection Act, something that is expected to be voted on in Parliament today. So you better be present and keep in mind what we are discussing here. So I wanted to pick up with Alexis quickly. As we talk about the institutionalization, the government did say that these would be therapeutic, quote unquote, therapeutic centers, residential and non-residential. And I know that you have some challenges to that. So if you could just elaborate for us what the challenges might be.
And before you answer, Alexis, just for the listeners, just to point out, it's one residential facility, which is down by St. Anne, a refurbished facility, and one non-residential, which is an expansion and refurbished area at the Maxfield Children's Home in Kingston.
Okay. Alexis?
Yes, so I'm also talking with my hat on as a mental health therapist,
Yes.
having worked in residential with children who have been in residential treatment centers. That residential treatment centers tend to be just another name for prison or incarceration. Like they tend to operate on the same principle of control and coercive treatment of whoever is in them. And so while from the start, when this was first recommended in 2013, we pushed back on that to say that this is still deprivation of liberty, that whether this is a prison or a prison by another name, such as a residential treatment center, that this will still be increase the likelihood of violence towards children, just as how there is an increased likelihood of violence towards children in children's homes and places of safety that have been documented over and over again. And that this is also coercive, meaning that this is this will be court mandated, and not only just court mandated, but court mandated for rubbish. Let's just be very clear. Court mandated for, as Sharika said, behaviors that are normal child and adolescent development. And that this is very specific because this is not going to address all, this is not for all children, right? Like any child that is from middle or upper class Jamaica is not going to see the inside of any of these institutions unless they are volunteering there. And so this is specifically for children from poor and working class families. And so this is not in principle any different. Residential treatment centers are not any different from how prisons and remand centers will be have been run. And why would it be? Because there's just this long history of these institutions being bad for children.
And to pick up with Sharika, if I may, Jade, one of the concerns that we flagged in our letter was, while theoretically the concept of having therapeutic intervention centers are a step in the right direction, we cautioned by asking for what are the regulations governing these intervention centers? What would be your response? Because I know some people on social media, I like to read those tweets wherein they're criticizing us as civil society. With the greatest of respect to the Jamaican media, I took note that there was hardly any coverage of the concerns that we raised, and where coverage was provided, it was secondary to the responses of the government. So it seems as if we're here harping over here as civil society about something that sounds so wonderful. But where are the regulations, Sharika Mills, to mitigate and prevent some of the things that Alexis outlined that have plagued us within the child protection sector?
Well, I think first, at our starting point, our ideal situation is that we would not want this to exist. That this shouldn't be the solution going forward. That this is what we were asking for or what we expected to have been the solution that they would have come up with, right? But if it is to exist, and since this is something it seems we are just going to have to live with, even though we will continue to push against it, we do want to know certain things as to how different, so we can assess how different these facilities will be from the other facilities that we know. So there has to be something guiding, how they will be operated, guiding the people who will work there, the treatment of the children that will be there. But what I think is further concerning, it was highlighted in the letter, and I think we should talk about it here too, is that, the Section 80 of the CCPA that you had brought to our attention, to say, well, for this provision, it does state, and we think there's a gap there too, that needs to be resolved. We need to know whether, based on that section, that children who have behavioral challenges, who are under a children's officer, like whether they can be sent to a correctional facility as well, because that now even takes us outside of these residential treatment and non-residential treatment facilities that we're talking about. And we're saying it still leaves the room for the same things to happen, not even for it to look like the same thing, but for it to actually be the same thing that happens. And so I think there just needs to be some clarity there for that section. And then also, if we're to entertain the idea of these facilities, what will they look like so we can assess?
They look quite pretty with the opening, Sharika Mills. You saw balls, beautiful balls and so on in boxes. I think there was a sign, Jade, in the video, clinical psychologist on the door. So to the everyday person looking on, this is a beautiful intervention. And again, we're harping about nothing. And by the way, I don't believe that. I'm just highlighting how people's thoughts are.
For sure. And that brought back to mind another concern that we'd highlighted is that there is in the draft that we would have been able to see, there is no guidance as to when the court would assign a child to a non-residential versus residential therapeutic
and whether it's
order.
for truancy or suicidal ideation, there's no category whatsoever about it.
Right, yes. So that was also of further concern. But as we talk about the facilities, Carla, we were mentioning that there are already children in the system that were brought into the system under Section 24 as it is now. Do you know of any plans to transition these children, or what any intention to what the plan is to deal with the children that would have already been institutionalized under the Section 24 that we're trying to change now?
That is a very good question, Jade, because when we are witnessing the presence of this increasing amount of children into the juvenile institution, it is completely clashing with the original diversion program which was set in place at the beginning of the Article 24 changes. That means that nothing has been happening. The children are still sent there. One of the info is that I got today, for example, which is ringing also an alarm, is that in summertime, the amount of juveniles which are detained increased. So I was surprised, and I was explained that through schools are closed, parents which have problems with children and usually send them to school, basically getting rid of them for half of the day, have to keep them at home. Therefore, they go to the police station and report the child behavior. And so there is an increase of juveniles along the summertime. What is going to happen in the future? It's hard to say. First of all, for all the comments which I was listening until now, what does it mean, a residential center? Who's going to decide which one is residential and which one won't be in need of residential care? That gives judges quite an amount of power, which is a kind of individual power without the guidelines, which are not there, right? Nobody's saying when and if. So that is
and just to clarify here for the listeners, as Carla made that very important point, when it comes to children with behavioral challenges, based on this bill, there is it is mandated that the judges actually secure some psychological psychiatric assessment. The challenge, as Carla is highlighting, however, is that the bill doesn't give further guidance to the judge in terms of what to do with the information that may very well arise from this assessment. So that gap.
That leaves a kind of each judge can decide policy, and it should be not like this. The other thing which I really wonder if is the 24 article going to be retroactive once there will be in case an approval with hopefully some changes. What's happening to those which actually are incarcerated as uncontrollable?
Yes.
As I mentioned before, is the wide majority of juveniles. Among the girls, is around 90% of them labeled as uncontrollable and detained. Among the boys, the percentage is a little inferior because there are quite an amount of young fellows which have been breaching the law with some illegal activities, etc. But it's still very high. All those which are actually detained are going to be included in the proposed changed policy, or they will remain in custody until age 18. That is a very, very hot question. But also I want to say that, and that last thing I will put on you today is in this new provision which we criticize, because there is no difference between those which are committing an offense and those which are showing mental, psychologies, troubles, and challenges.
Right.
Where is, in this proposal, the element of preventing crime? Preventing crime, it means also assisting the families before they reach the courthouse, right? So if there is a new idea about dealing with juveniles, one of the pillars should be prevention, because most of the children give sign of small challenges at the beginning. But when those challenges are totally ignored, they grow together with the lack of protection towards them, but also the lack of action which might assist a family to allow the child to remain at home instead of being sent, whether call it therapeutic, call it juvenile center. It is a huge trauma. Today there were 4 girls which are 14 years old and 3 weeks. And I was looking at these little girls who just entered the prison and they were totally, completely scared about being there. So before we reach what we should consider the last step, there are many activities, action, policies which can set in place to prevent to reach a prison.
Thank you so much for that last word, Carla. And I'll just ask Alexis and then Sharika to share your last points on this issue as well.
I just want to say that a lot of our conversation on uncontrollable, talks about the children and what the children are going through, and the onus is on the children, the burden is on the child to do something, and to repair or whatever. And for too long, that's been our conversation, and we need to start moving into how do we address the conditions that children are responding to, that their families are responding to, and give the support to lessen the likelihood of children having traumatic instances and responding to negative situations. And just to big up what Sharika had said, that even though this looks like it's going to pass, it's horrible madman it's going to pass this week, that we have to be committed to keep fighting it and to ultimately get what we believe children and their families deserve.
Thank you so much, Alexis. And Sharika?
I want to say that we should keep having empathy towards children who are, in reality, in difficult circumstances. Yes. And to always remember that these are still children, and that they, I was reading something last week that was saying that, we can have no greater objective than that these children are rehabilitated. Like, nothing can be more important to us than that. And so whatever we have to do to get to that point, or commitment to resolving the root causes of these issues, has to be stronger than, continuing to stop the gaps and mitigating the effects as we go along, so that we can get somewhere that actually makes sense. And, amendments like this and solutions like this only take us to our worst place. So, yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Yes, I just wanted to reiterate that we were joined by Alexis Goff, Carla Golotta, and Sharika Mills.
Yes. Human rights advocates who have been dedicated to the cause. We thank you for your work, and the nation will be better for the efforts. And I think collectively we have to try not to be daunted, even when parliaments they don't listen to us and heed to the caution that we are giving. But thank you for the usual support. So we take the break and then we pick up with that Kurt Mitchell judgment.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Ronald Thwaites, and I'm the host of The Public Eye and The Open Mind on the Bridge 99 and Irie Jam in the tri-state area. This program will tell you the truth about life back a yard. Fair, open talk, no gossip, no slander. We want to listen to your concerns, also want to help you with your problems in JA. We at The Bridge rate you and affirm our oneness as citizens of this blessed land we love. So join us now on Wednesdays on The Bridge, crossing the waters, linking Jamaicans and Jamaican lovers everywhere.
Reggae Sumfest 2023 celebrates 3 Grammy winners on this year's lineup.
Just want to say thank you to the Academy. Who have I to see them? I go see nice up there, yeah.
See Kabaka Pyramid at Reggae Sumfest.
Strictly Roots, Morgan Heritage.
Yeah, man.
Thank the Most High Jah for blessing us,
Don't have the dread to be Rasta. Reggae bring back love.
See 3-time Grammy winners Morgan Heritage at Reggae Sumfest. And no doubt we can't forget this 2K4 moment.
We'd also like to thank Lady Saw.
Except this Grammy winner makes a triumphant return to the Reggae Sumfest stage as Minister Marion Hall.
I'm doing better. I'm doing better. 8 years of room in my home.
See them all on Night 2, Saturday, July 22 at the Catherine Hall Entertainment Complex for Reggae Sunfest 2023. Sponsored by H&L Rapid True Value Flow, Ibero Star, JTV Secrets, Red Stripe, Grace, Magnum, TVJ, and H&L Agro.
Rights we should all know. Know your rights. Protect and preserve your rights. Protect and preserve your children's rights, your family's rights, and the rights of others. Do not break the law. Doing so is to compromise and possibly give away some of your rights. With every right, there is a responsibility.
Brought to you by the Office of the Public Defender.
I'm a maestro and I represent for which FM? Bridge FM, really rich FM.
The people's champion. Our mission is.
Welcome back to Let's Talk Justice. We are in the final segment of the show, and this week we are talking about the recent judgment from the Supreme Court, Kurt Mitchell and the Attorney General of Jamaica, and this is the third in major awards given for arbitrary detention under state of emergency.
The third and more to come, because apparently there are over 20 cases that have already been filed.
Mm-hmm.
And we've gotten indications, certainly by attorneys within our own network, that more will be filed.
Yes.
So it's something to watch. So just to give a quick recap, we have the Everton Douglas matter, which was the first case that was filed. That was filed by JFJ's attorneys and those within our network. John Clark, Sashika Richards, Isaac Buchanan, who represented 5 men whose detention 379 days, I believe in one, over 400 and odd days in another, abused while they were detained, no charges laid whatsoever. Then you fast forward to Rasheen Clark, who was awarded $17.8 million. I'm speaking from memory here, so the exact figure may be off. But again, similarly, the court ruled that the regulations that governed the SOE at the time, Mr. Clark's constitutional rights were violated. Yes. This present case, where $4 million was awarded to Mr. Kurt Mitchell, the premise of it was based on the precedent of Rasheen Clark case. So you're talking about persons' fundamental rights being violated, no charges being proffered, being detained for Mr. Mitchell, it was 20 days. Yes. Mr. Clark, I don't remember how many days at the time.
Yes.
But I just, how many?
More than 100, I believe.
But we just spoke about Everton Douglas. Over a year when you look at it.
Yes.
The wording in these judgments, though, they are critical because the court is sending a signal that they do not support how SOEs are being utilized.
Absolutely.
If you look at the judgment for Everton Douglas, speaking from memory, there was no valid emergency during this period.
Yes.
Constitutional rights have been breached. The word in Mr. Mitchell's judgment as well, quite instructive. They said that the state abused their power.
Absolutely.
That was what the court said.
Absolutely.
From a JFJ standpoint, we do not believe, however, while we welcome this judgment, we believe that the monetary value should have been much more. Because when you have a state, it's a powerful organ energy. Do you know this?
Yes.
Quite powerful. And then when you have a small sum, like $4 million, I think 2.4 of it was for
breach of it was split. So 2.4 was for breach of constitutional rights, and the remainder was for the false imprisonment.
False imprisonment.
Yes.
The judge said there is no basis for this man being imprisoned.
Yes.
You take away the man car, take away the man phone. I don't think to the day the man get back his property.
Yes.
Right? So to me, $4 million to be suffering through that loss of business income. Your wife is traumatized as well.
Yes.
Right? The court, in my estimation, and certainly my board chair said it, that we would have hoped that more would have been imposed, similar to perhaps Mr. Clark. Right? That send a signal to the country, to the government, that if you continue down this unfortunate path, we're going to be paying for it.
Yes.
Because perhaps it's the economic cost that will make taxpayers take pause and say something not right with this.
Absolutely.
Because the social costs, though, there are a lot. When you can see a big grown man crying in front of you, one of the cases, the man almost lost his eye.
Yeah.
Right?
I think I recall one where the gentleman missed the birth of his child.
Missed the birth of his child, and we're talking about fathers being more involved.
Yes.
What could be more emotional than that?
You know, Mikhail, one of the things that, and I think this case kind of reiterates, I had said it was inflammatory at the time, but you're constantly bringing a strong opinion. But you had said that you feel as though the SOE is a fishing exercise. And I think that this case kind of illustrates that premise. As we would have seen, over 20 days with no indication as to why this gentleman was even detained in the first place.
But Jade, let's use quantitative information here.
Yes.
The Office of the Public Defender in 2018 said 9,519 people. And if I'm off, it's probably off by one with what I'm quoting here, because I'm speaking from memory. Over 9,000 people were detained. And when you ask what is the basis of my detention, police tell you say because you're under SOE. I didn't know being under SOE is an offense. And then on top of that, only 5% were ever charged.
Yes.
Remember, we're going through our own access to information request to the Ministry of National Security. And when we look at that data, which is still incomplete in what they have sent us,
yes,
very few people were charged. And interestingly, listening to the Commissioner of Police, when you ask who were charged in the period of SOE, the police commissioner publicly stated these people were charged under the Jamaica Constabulary Force Act.
Yes.
So on what basis are we expending millions of dollars, which they haven't responded to? Because outside of the lawsuit that they're paying out, we need to know how much money pay for the toilet, the tent, and who got those contracts.
Absolutely.
Because it's going to be a floodgate that is opening. Social cost, economic costs. This is an affront, an attack on democracy in this country. And we should reject the state of emergency because we're paying dearly for it. And we ask ourselves how much of that money could have been put forward to enhancing the capacity of the Jamaica Constabulary Force, because officers, they don't want it. And I hope one of them will be brave in speaking up around their discontent. But certainly I remember the Police Federation chair, Corporal Rohan James, rather, he would have voiced some concerns about the SOE. So we continue the discussion.
Yes, and you know, we are basically out of time, Mikhail. But the only thing I wanted to highlight out of what you would have said is that we continue to see these judgments come out, and then very little is changed. We hear no long-term plan to address what we have identified to be really social issues and not issues that can necessarily, and not to say that there will not have to be a security response, but it cannot be the sole response, and to the extent that it is.
And the scant regard that is being placed on it. I think that we're coming up on time. Yes. But the last thing I want to point out was that you keep seeing the regulations being tabled. Sometimes the SOE and the regulations still not tabled yet, or it's not made public. So what is governing the police officers? What do they know the powers? How do they know the powers that they have? As citizens, how do you know your rights?
Absolutely.
The regulations also say that you have an emergency review tribunal to make your objections known. And based on word that we're getting in, persons have asked upon the first day of being detained, can I go before the review tribunal? And they are told that the review tribunal not set up yet. SOE and the review tribunal has not been established. That cannot be.
And those are grounds for further action.
As Carlo Golato said this morning on another program, it's a bloodbath and a floodgate has been opened on the country.
Well,
your trivia as we close out.
You know, today we did not give the trivia out.
Oh, okay.
So we have no response. So next week we'll do a double trivia to make up for it. So sorry to our listeners.
Or you can just play something on Instagram for our
sure.
followers.
So,
yes.
Yeah, we'll do a little Instagram trivia this week. But thank you so much for joining us. We hope this was an instructive episode. I think it was instructive, even just for myself. So thank you for joining us. I am Jade Williams, Policy and Advocacy Specialist.
And I'm Michael Jackson, Executive Director. Thank you, and keep listening in, and we'll see you next week.
Jamaicans, justice. the people's champion. Justice, justice for all. Justice under law. Justice, Jamaica the known. Right to life, right to liberty. Out of many we are one in a Jamaica. Making a better place for the boys and girls. Created equal by the creator. For equal rights and opportunities. No to unlawful detention. And police brutalization. Class, gender, race or religion. We not tolerate discrimination.
To join the fight against injustice, contact us at 755-4524 or JamaicансForJustice.org.
The people's champion.
Don't wanna leave, don't wanna go. We'll stay tuned to Bridge 99 Jamaica. Don't wanna leave, we'll stay tuned. Bridge 99 Jamaica.
This and every Sunday, 2 to 6 p.m. It's Sound Selection with Jack Scorpio.
We're about to take it